Welcome to the first video on this channel. The proof is in the puzzles. Every week we'll be solving a jigsaw puzzle and discussing either a court case, conspiracy theory, news story, or really anything else interesting that we come across. For this week we will be solving this 300-piece puzzle from MB Puzzles. This is an image of Blickling Hall in Norfolk, England, which was built in 1616. As for this topic of discussion for today, we will be looking at the O.J. Simpson case. So without further ado, let's hop into the video. So who was O.J. Simpson? Well, Orenthal James Simpson, better known as O.J. Simpson, was an NFL running back for the Buffalo Bills in the 70s and is considered one of the greatest running backs of all time. Some of his accolades include winning an MVP in 1973 for being the first NFL player to rush for more than 2,000 yards, winning the Heisman Trophy at USC, which is awarded to the best football player in college, and he also holds the NFL single-season yards per game record at 143. Some other interesting tidbits about O.J. Kim Kardashian's father, Robert Kardashian, was actually one of O.J.'s lawyers, and O.J. was actually the best man at his wedding. O.J. was also considered for the Terminator role instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And O.J. also lost a court case for $25,000 because he was pirating DirecTV's satellite signals. On the night of June 12, 1994, O.J.'s ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, was eating dinner at the Mezzaluna restaurant with her kids. After leaving the restaurant, Ron Goldman, a friend of Nicole's and waiter at the restaurant, was notified by Nicole's mother that some glasses had been left at the restaurant. So Goldman was going to take the glasses with him to Nicole's residence in Brentwood, California after his shift. Fast forward to midnight and the bodies of Brown and Goldman are discovered. Both were stabbed to death, but it appeared that Nicole was the target and Goldman was only collateral damage. After investigating the crime scene, the detectives found a blood-stained left-handed glove, but no right-handed glove to match it. Meanwhile, O.J. was scheduled to board a red-eye flight that same night, but when the limousine driver arrived to pick him up at 10:25, O.J. was not at home, and his car was not there. A little while later, however, O.J. got in the limo, claiming he had overslept. A couple of interesting things happened here. Testimony would later reveal that O.J. had seemed agitated that night, and even complained about how hot it was that night, even though it wasn't a warm night. The driver also noted that he had loaded 4 bags into the car, one of them being a knapsack that O.J. was persistent that the limo driver should not touch. Later that evening, when O.J. arrived at his hotel, he was only seen with 3 bags. So remember earlier how there was only a left-handed glove at the crime scene? Well, later during the investigation, the right-handed match was found on O.J.'s property. Because of this, the police decided to charge O.J. with the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. This led to the infamous low-speed white Bronco chase that was watched by an estimated 95 million people and was the 6th most viewed event in U.S. history at the time. Only Super Bowls since have topped that number. Now let's look at the trial. One piece of evidence that gives O.J. potential motive is the fact that O.J.'s girlfriend at the time, Paula Barbieri, ended their relationship over voicemail that night. So the theory from the prosecution is that O.J. went over to his ex-wife Nicole's house to see if they could start back up again, due to a previous history of abuse with her during their marriage, which included 62 unique incidents, with one leading to a domestic violence charge against O.J. and also stalking and harassment after their divorce. The theory was that when Nicole refused to get back with O.J., O.J. in his anger killed her as a final act of control. This theory was corroborated by the fact that O.J. wasn't seen from 9:36 to 10:54, right when the murders were happening. Thus, he had no alibi. There was also significant DNA evidence, the most compelling being Brown and Goldman's blood being found on the door and inside Simpson's Bronco. The glove fibers of the glove at the crime scene and the one found on O.J.'s property also matched as well, with evidence that O.J. had bought a pair of that glove in that size at a local Bloomingdale's. Now the defense's arguments. They mainly argued that the DNA evidence was compromised and contaminated, and that any evidence that wasn't was planted by the police. As far as compromise, they do have a legitimate claim of collection errors for blood samples. The crime scene collectors admitted to being sloppy by not changing their gloves when they should have, and storing the samples in a non-refrigerated police van, some of the samples being stored in the van for up to 7 hours. The defense then claimed this sloppy police work could result in the real killer's DNA being 100% degraded. As far as the contamination angle goes, the defense questioned a microbiologist who claimed that the LAPD had a substantial contamination problem and that only 3 DNA matches should be deemed valid. Not surprisingly, the defense claimed these were the same 3 samples that were allegedly planted by the cops. The motive they gave for this was racism, mainly by Detective Mark Furman with the help of Detective Philip Vaniter. This was definitely the defense's strongest angle as they played off the emotions of the majority black jury, many of whom were angry because of the history of racial bias in the LAPD. With 150 million people tuned in, the verdict would be the most televised moment in U.S. history. To the surprise of many, the jury found O.J. Simpson not guilty and acquitted him of the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. One quick note before we get into my analysis. After the trial, Ron Goldman's father filed the wrongful death lawsuit against O.J., and they actually found him responsible for the deaths of both Nicole and Ron, and as a result, O.J. was ordered to pay the Goldman family $33.5 million in damages. This is interesting because one jury found him guilty and another did not, yet he never faced any criminal consequences. So my analysis, did O.J. do it? I think it's pretty clear that he did. There's a couple of things for me that do it. First, the left glove being at the crime scene and the match at his house. Second, he can't be located in the exact window that the murders happened. Third, his history of domestic abuse and abrupt breakup with Paula. Fourth, the large amounts of DNA evidence in the case, including the blood found in his Bronco. And fifth, I didn't mention this earlier, but after the trial, O.J. collaborated on a book called If I Did It, where he essentially confesses to the murder. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So I want to break each of these down and see what the defense against these might be. For the first one, the defense that the glove must have been planted because the cops were racists. To me, it seems highly unlikely that there would be a large conspiracy to convict someone of murder just because there were a few possible racists. Also, the evidence showed that the detective accused of planting evidence showed up 2 hours after the crime scene had already been scoured, so finding the matching glove from the crime scene after it had already been searched and then planting it on O.J.'s property seems excessive and highly unlikely as well. The defense for number 2 is that the murder didn't happen during the window that the prosecution claimed it happened in. For this, they brought in Dr. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist who claimed it had happened closer to 11, thus giving O.J. a potential alibi. However, this can be disputed because after the trial, Baden admitted some of his claims were inaccurate and that he thought testifying for Simpson was a mistake. For the third claim, the only claim against it is that the abuse and the murder are disconnected. The relevant statistic here, however, is that 80% of abuse victims who go on to get murdered ended up being murdered by their current or ex-husband, meaning the two might not totally be disconnected. For number 4, the defense claimed the DNA evidence was mishandled to where the real killer's DNA could have 100% degraded. This is possibly the most ridiculous claim the defense ends up making because this assumes that only the killer's DNA would have degraded and not any of the other DNA, which is completely absurd. They also claimed that there was possible contamination, but it appears this was an overstatement and that even if there was some amount of contamination, this likely wouldn't lead to false positives. And finally, for the last claim, the rebuttal would be that the book was merely what the title says, hypothetical if O.J. did do it. But there was an interview, I'll link it below, where if it's not a confession, I don't know what is. It's pretty wild. You can hear O.J. pretty much confessing to what he did. Overall, I think this case was very interesting to learn about and hope you enjoyed my video. Comment below what you think I should talk about next, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it. Thanks.